Well, you might notice this blank canvas, and it's how we're going to start this year. Blank canvas. God is the artist. He is the potter. We are the clay. We're going to make and mold of our lives and paint in and fill in and give dimension to and color and shape to that which is lasting by faith. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning, not of creation, but of the creation of the family and the family dynamics of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. So join me as we look at God's perspective on sacrifice and worship. So in Genesis 4, the beginning of this wonderful family of Adam and Eve and their first two sons, Cain and Abel. And Genesis chapter 4 begins this way. Adam and Eve had conceived and bore a son and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. And then she bore again, this time Abel. And Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. So one's a farmer and one's a shepherd. And God had already told Adam that he would labor extensively and hard with the sweat of his brow, and this was going to be a result and part of his consequence of sin, of his disobedience to God, that, there would have to be cultivation of the ground, and that through hard labor. So in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought forth an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought forth an offering from his flocks and of their fat, the fat portion that belonged to the Lord, and also the firstborn. This would be the best that Abel had to offer. And so he offered to the Lord, both of them, the farmer and the shepherd, Abel and Cain and Abel. And it seems that God would have accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's. That's what it says in verse 5. And because of this, Cain's countenance fell. Cain's face went from, look what I've done for you, to quickly grumbling and just sad of countenance, angry, the Bible tells us, right? So there was a heart condition attached to his countenance. His face was showing, and sometimes it's hard to hide that. Sometimes our countenance can fall, and it's hard to hide that from other people. Now, in this case, it was hard to hide it from God. There was things that Cain thought that he was hiding from God, which was his heart, but God seems to see his heart right on his face. And we know people like that, right? They wear their heart on their sleeve, so to speak. Cain was wearing his heart right on his sleeve, and God noticed it. And then God brought it up in order to have a conversation with him. And so he asks a question, God does, and he takes time to deal with Cain and his saddened countenance, his face that's fallen, and his heart that's being revealed through his just going about his day. But God's concerned about what's going on in his heart, because obviously there's an anger in him that needs to be properly addressed. Otherwise, there could be other sin. And James says this, that whatever is not of faith is of sin. And so we also can get a little commentary on this section in Genesis in Hebrews chapter 11, that great faith chapter where faith is being offered, and many heroes of faith are being outlined there. And Hebrews 11:3 says that by faith Abel offered a more acceptable offering to God than Cain. And so we also know that the heart condition of these two boys was, one was having faith, one was not. One was out of belief that he offered, and one was not. It wasn't just what they brought, it was how they brought it. It wasn't just that they both brought offerings and sacrifices, but it was the motive. And God is not just concerned about the motive. We won't always have completely pure motives in everything we do for God or in response to God's asking of us and requiring of us. But what takes place when our hearts aren't right and the motive is off, and perhaps we want to leverage God. Perhaps we want to somehow use the things that we have been doing or the things that we have been offering and just let that be to God the way that we see it. But oftentimes God doesn't see it the same, and the thing that really is not good for us, and it's not that God would catch us doing something. Like he didn't just catch Cain, offering in a inferior way. It's that offering to God a worship that is feigned or is pretend or is fake is an abomination to him. Psalm 81, right at the end of that psalm, says something very telling about the heart, and really about our tendency. And we can include ourselves in this verse, though it seems harsh and it seems like one that we might want to talk about others. But he says in verse 15 of Psalm 81, the haters of the Lord would pretend obedience, would pretend submission to him, but their fate would endure forever. And so, there's an aspect to worship that not only is, can be pretend, or that there is a category of offering to God that is out of fake obedience or pretend submission, like Psalm 81 says, but that that has a lasting effect, not only in this life, but in the life to come. At the offering, and it's not just that God wants, purity of heart, and those that never have pure hearts are never commended, but that is the thing that God does accept. And so, like in the case of Cain, he says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? That's the next verse there in 7, after he addresses why Cain's countenance has fallen in verse 6, and he says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not, then sin lies at your door, and you must master it. Its desire is to have you, and you should overcome it. You should master that, because otherwise it will master you. Paul said it the best in Romans chapter 6, right? He said, he who sins is a slave to sin. And he asked the question there too, shall we keep on sinning that grace might abound? In other words, if God is gracious, should we just not care about motives? Should we just, keep on going in a direction that is fake worship? And this is something that to God is hypocrisy, that from the very beginning of the Bible with Cain and Abel, and all the way to the end, right? In the book of Acts, we see Ananias and Sapphira and their sacrifice that was supposed to be worship, but was with a wrong heart. And God took it very seriously. And so here with Cain, he thinks it's so serious, he comes and appears to him to talk to him about this. And worship is always going to be tested. Faith is always going to be tested. Faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. And so here, it is not just Cain that his sacrifice has been tested and not found approving to God, but indeed Abel's sacrifice would have been tested too, because we read that Abel brought of the first of his flock and he offered it to God, but he also offered the fat. And the fat portion was that which was tasty to them. It was tasty, and it was something that was desirable. And he had understood that that portion, the very best portion, should go to God. Now, could he have offered the animal and kept the fat? Yeah, he could have. And I'm sure that God would have had a conversation with him as well, because that best part is what God wants. Remember Mary and Martha, and when they had Jesus over to their house, one was concerned about this relational dynamic with God. One was wanting to scoot up close to him and have intimacy and fellowship and learn. And the other was task-oriented and wanting to just get some things done and keep things in order and, practically serve and get things done. And Jesus said to Martha, that was Martha, Martha, Mary has chosen the better portion. She has chosen the best thing, and it's not going to be taken away from her. Now, both things were good, but one was a little more relationally oriented. One was a little more personal, and that was wanting to spend time with Jesus. And the same thing is with God with us, and even in this story, because Cain offered without faith, and it was just a doing of the act. It was just bringing to God and laying it at his feet, but without a heart is just a task. It's just a performance. And even the law of God, which the Israelites tried to keep, they turned into something that was just a task. It was just something that they tried to do over and over, only to find that they couldn't do it. And so they found ways of pretending that they could do it. And so when Jesus arrives on the scene and has many conversations with Pharisees and leaders in Israel, he wants to address this issue of the heart and how their worship was feigned, how their worship was not complete, how it was not the best part, how they used the law to justify themselves, but didn't actually keep the law, didn't really love the law, didn't really love who the law was about. And this is something that David brings out in the Psalms when he says, "Oh Lord, I love thy law. Oh, how your precepts to me are, they're sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. By them is your servant warned, and in keeping them there's great reward." It's not just in the doing of the law, because that can be something that people use to leverage God or to say, "Here, look, I've done something for you." And this is in a sense what Cain was doing. He was saying, "God, I've done something for you. I brought you something. Why will you not accept it?" And Hebrews just dispels all doubt as to whether or not it was about what they brought. It wasn't animal or vegetable. It wasn't vegan or meat eating. It was the fact that Abel brought his by faith. The very best portion always comes by faith, always comes with a heart. And so he asks God, he says to him, when God asks of Cain, "Why is your countenance fallen?" And he says, "Sin is at your door, but you should master it." And Cain talked with Abel, his brother, in the field, and when they were out there, it says that he killed him. He took him out. took him out at the kneecaps, and I'm sure that there was some jealousy involved as well. You know, that's a whole nother aspect we're not going to look at right now. But he says, because God comes to him and says, where is your brother Abel? I hear his blood crying to me from the ground. And so he said, am I my brother's keeper? Right? Am I my brother's keeper? That's verse 9. And from that smart aleck response, God says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries from the ground. So now you're cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its increase to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you will be on the earth. So his curse then is that desert landscape. You're going to be a fugitive and a vagabond, and everything you go to put your hand to is going to be cursed. It's not going to be blessed. And this is the simple fact of when what we're concerned about in our relationship with God is just doing things for him and not being with him. You know, this is the case that Jesus addresses as well when he says, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, didn't we do things for you? Didn't we cast out devils in your name? And didn't we feed the poor? And he says, I will have to say to them, depart from me, for I never knew you. I never had relationship. I never had this closeness with you, that which is fellowship of the heart. And this is what God is after, not just what we bring. This story isn't just about who brought the best, but it's about whose heart was connected to God. And so from that we can learn as well. And we can take the challenge, not to offer God our feigned obedience or just something, but the greatest thing that God wants offered back to him is someone. He wants to see that as he gives to us his very person, that person takes shape in our life, molded in his image, and then offered back to him. We offer back to him. This is what God wants to see echoed, is himself. He wants to see that mirrored, his image mirrored in us through his new creation. So that blank canvas, a picture of that white, undefiled, untouched canvas that has yet to be painted on, has yet to be inscribed or expressed upon it, a piece of artwork. That's what God wants us to offer to him. Just a blank sheet, a blank canvas. God, do your way. Paint your picture. Describe who you are in my life.